welcome back. This is episode 2 of our Intro to Psychology podcast. I'm Emily Huff, and today I will be discussing chapter 1 of our Intro to Psychology course, which is all about the history and the basics of psychology. Before we start learning about any of the concepts of psychology, you have to understand where psychology came from and the different perspectives that are out there when it comes to psychology. So that's what this chapter is all about. The book does an excellent job of highlighting the different psychologists that were influential in the founding of psychology and how it sort of developed over time, and one person would make a discovery which led to another thing. And all of that is really important. One thing I really want to focus on in this podcast is about the different perspectives when it comes to psychology. We talked before that psychology is a science. It is rooted in scientific discovery and data and experimentation, but there's also this social component too, which sort of creates these gray areas. And when I say gray areas, what I mean is it's up for personal interpretation or your own perspective. Throughout the course, I will talk about the different perspectives of psychology, so I feel like it's really important for you to understand the different perspectives of psychology. In class, I will constantly, talk about that mountain, this visual of a mountain, where depending on where you are standing on the mountain, you have a different viewpoint of a topic or a concept. Is the mountain snowy and cold, or is it, smooth and in the sun? It totally depends on where you are standing on that mountain. And in psychology, it's a lot the same. We have information, but a lot of it will just depend on where you stand. Do you think this is more of a reason or an explanation of why something is the way that it is? It sort of has to do with your own personal perspective. So we have some different perspectives we're going to talk about in class. I'm going to talk about 5 of them in this podcast before talking about research methods. The first one I'm going to talk about is the neurological or the biological perspective. In the biological, neurological perspective of psychology, this is the one that's extremely scientific. Why are things the way that they are? Well, it all boils back down to science and chemicals and the way that the brain synapses and fires and the different neurotransmitters you have in your body cause different things to happen. It's very scientific. So if there's one thing I want you to think about with the biological, neurological perspective, is that everything can be explained through raw science. Take a phenomena like, why I can be hot when I'm completely covered up at night under my blankets, but if I just stick my toe or my foot out of the blanket, suddenly I'm perfectly cool. But to have no blankets, I would be way too cold, and that whole, why do we sleep better in certain sleeping positions or whatever it might be. The biological perspective of it would all come back to the way that the muscles and the senses are in your body. It all has to do with the biological, physical composition of your body and temperatures and reacting to different things. So that is a neurological, biological perspective. The cognitive perspective has to do with your thought processes and your thought patterns. So for the sleeping example I just gave, what if I just think that makes me sleep better? Or I just think that I am more comfortable sleeping on my left side versus my right side, or on my back or on my stomach, or with 3 pillows and wearing socks, not wearing socks. It's just the thought that I have. It's just the belief that I have that it is more comfortable to sleep on my left side than my right side. That would be the cognitive way to explain things. It's just because of your thought processes and your thought patterns. In class, we talk about Mark Becker, and the cognitive perspective there, he had a thought, a belief that Coach Thomas, by murdering Coach Thomas, he was getting rid of demons and saving children. That was his thought process. So cognitive way to explain that phenomena would be the thoughts that were in his head. Behavioral perspective doesn't really care what thoughts are in your head and doesn't care so much about all the scientific data as far as the muscles and the chemical reactions in your body and physical things like that. The behavioral perspective, the reason things happen is because we have just learned to do that way, or we have learned that behavior. So going back to the sleeping example, sticking my leg out from under the covers to get cool at night, I did that one time and I felt really comfortable. So now I have just learned if I'm a little bit hot, if I stick my foot out there, I will. I had positive consequences the last time I did that, so that's why I do it again. Why does somebody, throw things in class or make a funny comment or not listen to the teacher or make fun of the teacher when she's talking with her hands? Well, because one time when they did that, they got positive feedback. Someone laughed, gave them attention, and now they constantly do that over and over again. So the behavioral perspective is more the reason things happen is because we have learned that behavior. Even it's just you saw it on TV or you saw somebody else do it, that behavior is a learned behavior. One of the ones we'll talk about a lot throughout the course is the evolutionary perspective. In the evolutionary perspective, the reason things happen or the reason psychology is the way that it is because it was necessary for survival. And in the evolutionary perspective, I will always talk about like caveman days. We are talking about back in caveman days, that was necessary for survival. So for example, why are children afraid of strangers? The evolutionary perspective would say stranger danger. Back in caveman days, if you were not afraid of people that you did not recognize, it put you more prone for danger, more susceptible to predators and things like that, and you were less likely to survive, pass along your genes, survival to the fittest, and all of that stuff. So in the evolutionary perspective, it's all about this was something that my ancestors passed down to me because it is a survival type of instinct. So perhaps there's something survival related to needing to stick your foot out from under the covers to get a little cooler at night. That would be the evolutionary perspective. Sociocultural is an interesting one. It's different than behavioral. It's not exactly, it's learned behavior, but it's things that have happened because it's commonplace or regular in society. So these are just things that happen in our culture. And this is probably a really bad example. I was just thinking about this though. The whole idea of Grand March and the fact that for prom, you guys form lovely couples and you parade into the gym and down the stage and they announce your names. I was never familiar with that concept before, so that whole idea to me when I came here to Denver was extremely weird. I was just, why would people do this? Why would you go on to stay? The whole idea of Grand March was very different to me. But for many people in this community or people that are familiar with that cultural tradition, that is just what you do at prom. It's very commonplace. It's very normal. Same thing with like graduation parties where some people are like, it's not common to have a big graduation party or this or that. These small things that are cultural or societally acceptable and kind of morphed into the societal cultural fabric explain why things happen. So why does a girl get 5 of her girlfriends to go to the bathroom with her when they're someplace? I don't know. It just seems that that's what groups do. It just seems like this societal sort of thing. So sociocultural perspective really looks at how a society functions and what is acceptable in society. So those are some of the perspectives, and like I said, we're going to talk about them throughout the entire course, so I really thought it was important to mention them today in this podcast. The other thing I just wanted to touch on before we left today is just the research methods and understanding how we get information and things like that. So in psychology, there are different ways to gather data, and we can gather data and information by doing a case study, a naturalistic observation, or a survey. And through those 3 methods, all we're doing is getting some info. I'm either studying somebody intensely, I am just observing a group of people or a situation without interacting with them, just observing them, or I'm giving some sort of a survey for feedback. Once you get all of that information. You can look at that and see if you have any correlations or anything that strikes you as interesting, and you can develop a theory and move from there. But remember, correlation does not equal causation. If you want to determine whether or not there is a causation associated with any of this information you're finding, you have to do an experiment. Experiments are what let you know if there is a cause and effect relationship. You have to do a scientific experiment to find if there is a cause and effect relationship in psychology, and that's important to make sure that you understand that experiments are the only way to get cause and effect. Everything else just gives us information. And it's nice to be able to see correlational data. It's nice to know that increased caffeine intake is correlated to problematic behaviors in the classroom for students. So if somebody is drinking way too much, I feel like you guys don't drink Red Bull anymore. I don't know what energy drink is out there. But if somebody is having way too much caffeine and they're having too many behavioral problems in the classroom, it's nice to know that there is a correlation there, but it doesn't tell me anything about why. Perhaps the person is having some problematic behaviors and the caffeine is something they're using to try to control it, or is the caffeine causing more problematic behaviors? We don't know. That you would have to do an experiment still. Still, it's nice to know these correlations when they pop up. So be careful of that when you read scientific studies. Is it a correlation? Do they have any cause and effect experimental research to back that up, or is it just stating a correlation? So with those basics in mind, with the perspectives and the research methods and the different historical factors of building psychology, I feel like you have a nice foundation to be able to move forward and be successful in the rest of this course. Next chapter is all about the brain and chemicals, and we do still get a little science-y. And then after that, we will move into some real-world applicable things. So now that you have the basics on that, next episode we will talk about the brain and some science, and we'll go from there. Thanks.